Okay, so in this lecture we're going to discuss a couple of different topics. We're going to start off and identify some of the cranial nerves that are found on our brain model, and then from there we're going to work our way and discuss about the brachial plexus, and then identify some of the nerves that are found on the arm model. So the first thing that I'm going to start off with is the cranial nerves, and so what I have here, so this is our brain model, and what you're looking at, this would be an inferior view of the brain. Okay, so this part here is the frontal lobe. And so before I go over the cranial nerves, the first thing that I want to say is that they go in numerical order as you work your way down. So let's go ahead and identify them just based off of the numbers first, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so starting here at the top, you have cranial nerve 1. So this is the olfactory. You have cranial nerve 2 here, which is the optic nerve. And then cranial nerve 3, which is here. So this is the oculomotor nerve. Here on the back side, so the trochlear nerve is what wraps around this way. So this is cranial nerve 4, and you can see it there on the back side. So once again, this here is the midbrain. So then the next one is here. This is the trigeminal cranial nerve. So that's cranial nerve 5 here on the pons. And then after 5 you have, this is 6, this is the abducens. So then you work your way lateral. So this is 7, which is the facial. Cranial nerve 8 is here. This is the vestibulocochlear nerve. And then you have 9, which is here. So 9, 10, and 11. So 9 is the glossopharyngeal, 10 is the vagus, and then number 11 is the accessory. And then the last one is here, which is the cranial nerve 12, which is the hypoglossal. Okay, so now that we've identified them, let's kind of like talk about some of them. So what you need to know is, first off, the Roman numeral of the cranial nerve, as well as the name of the cranial nerve, including its function. So what does it do, as well as is it motor, sensory, or both? Okay, so whenever we say motor versus sensory, the first thing that should come to your mind for motor is movement. So for instance, some of the cranial nerves that are purely motor, they're helping, for instance, for movement of the eye, so moving the eyeball, and then there's also for some of the skeletal muscles on the axial skeleton. Okay, so that's for motor. When I say sensory, that's referring to like sensations that's going to the brain. So for instance, vision, right? You're not, so the moving of the eyes is because the muscles are attached there, but just seeing is a sensory act, right? That's for vision. So that's for the sensory. If it's both, that means that there's a motor and a sensory component. Okay, so this is the first one we already identified, so olfactory, so that's the function is for smell. This is optic, this is for vision. So 3, 4, and 6, all of these are the cranial nerves that are going to innervate the eye muscles. Okay, so now that you know that's what it does, what I have written on the board, I want you to make note of this. So what you need to write down is so it's SO4, LR6, and then you also have AO3. So what that stands for, so the first one, so AO3 stands for all others 3. So SO4 stands for superior oblique, so that's one of the eye muscles. So we're going to identify that here in a sec. But so SO4, and then LR6 is the lateral rectus, the 6th cranial nerve. Okay, so let's identify some of the muscles here on the eye model. So here on the eye model, I have to know what's medial, what's lateral. So I look at the lacrimal gland, and it drains here to the medial side. So if with that being said, this is the medial rectus, and then this part is the lateral rectus. They say rectus because the muscle is straight. So then you have superior, and then the inferior rectus is there on the bottom. So the other two muscles of the eye are the oblique ones. So you have the superior oblique, because it's at an angle, and then you also have the inferior oblique, which is here. So those are the rules that I want you to use as far as if I say this muscle is innervated by what nerve. So if it's not the superior oblique muscle, if it's not the lateral rectus muscle, then it's innervated by the oculomotor, because all of the other cranial nerves are innervated by the oculomotor. Okay, so that's it. Here for the eye, those are some of the different functions. Okay, so we've talked about these. The next one is this one that's known as the trigeminal. So they call it the trigeminal because there are 3 branches that are coming off of there. And so the 3 branches that come off, it goes like this. So if I take my glasses off, it's like this. So the first one is ophthalmic, and then it's the maxillary, which is here where the maxilla is. And then the bottom one here is the mandibular. And so this cranial nerve, it has motor and sensory components. So for the sensory component, it's just like sensation on the face, so like touching my face. Right? That information is going to the somatosensory, primary somatosensory cortex. But for the motor component of it, it's innervating muscles of mastication. So those muscles include, for instance, ones that we have already identified in lab. So that's why I have this head model here. So for instance, the masseter, which is here, right? So when you bite down, right, you're chewing food. You also have the temporalis. So both of these muscles are going to be innervated by cranial nerve 5, the trigeminal, which is coming off of the pons. Okay. So we'll continue to work our way down. So this is 5. So then 6, we've already identified that one. That was for the eye. And then 7 is for facial. So it functions for the facial expressions. Okay, so it has a motor component to it. All right, so then the next one is 8, which is here. So this is the vestibulocochlear. So vestibulocochlear, the function of that is for hearing and balance. And so if you remember from last week, what we talked about was that cranial nerve travels through the internal acoustic meatus, not the external acoustic meatus. So we're going to learn all about hearing and everything, but I have a model that I want to show you just to identify the internal acoustic meatus. So this here is our ear model, and this is a particular part of the bone. So what you're looking at here from this side on the inside, so this is the internal acoustic meatus. So this is where the vestibulocochlear nerve is coming out of. So if I take this top part off, you can now see some of the organs for hearing and balance, which are right here. And this is the cranial nerve 8, which is coming through the internal acoustic meatus. Okay, so that's cranial nerve 8. Okay, so the next one we have, so that was cranial nerve 8. So then cranial nerve 9, which is here, is the glossopharyngeal. So this is for instance, the gag reflex. So that's for glossopharyngeal as well as swallowing. So then for this one, you have 10, which is the vagus. So it's vagus. So what the vagus nerve does is it helps to innervate some of the different organs. So for instance, it innervates the heart, it innervates the lungs, the intestines, and so for the function of that, it's motor and sensory. And so the last two we have are this one here, which is the accessory. So cranial nerve 11 is the accessory, and the accessory nerve, it innervates a couple different muscles. So the first one that it innervates is this one, which is the sternocleidomastoid, and it also innervates the trapezius muscle. So it's a purely motor cranial nerve. So then the last cranial nerve, which is here in the middle, this one is, so right here, that's cranial nerve 12. So cranial nerve 12 is the hypoglossal. So that's helping with movement of the tongue. Okay, so we've identified this, the brainstem, the cranial nerves, some of the muscles here on the arm model. And so the next thing I want to do is to identify some of the muscles here and what their innervations are. So we've already identified the pec major, the pec minor, and then this is here. So this is superficial. So this is the serratus anterior, and it's superficial. It's superficial to the intercostals, right? Because these are the intercostal muscles in between the ribs. So that's the serratus anterior. And then this is the diaphragm. So the diaphragm is innervated by the phrenic nerve. The serratus anterior is innervated by the long thoracic, and then the pec major and minor, both of these are innervated by the medial pectoral nerve. Okay, so with that being said, this is going to help me transition into a concept which is known as the brachial plexus. So the brachial plexus is what I have drawn on the board. And generally speaking, what the brachial plexus is, it's basically a convergence and divergence of these different nerves that are coming from the ventral rami. So the ventral rami was a particular part that you identified here in lab. So that's what this one is here on the outside. So that's the ventral rami. And so this is the same thing that is coming off of this over here from this vertebral column model. Okay, so these ventral rami are coming out. And so what I have drawn on the board, it starts at C5 and then it ends at T1. So those are the spinal cord or the levels for each of the ventral rami that are coming out this way. So it starts at C5 and it ends at T1, the brachial plexus. And then if you work your way outwards, you're getting more into the peripheral side. So we're working our way this way. So the brachial plexus is around this region over here. Okay. So for the brachial plexus, there are a couple different regions that have been used to describe where these some of the different nerves are coming from. So one of the mnemonics that is commonly used, so it's real Texans drink cold beer. So what that stands for is roots, trunks, divisions, cords, and branches. So the branches, that's the terminal end. So at the terminal end, if you remember, just remember marmu. So it's musculocutaneous, axillary, radial, median, and ulnar. So those are all the nerves in the peripheral. And so those are the peripheral, the terminal end of the brachial plexus, where the nerves are going to come down, and that's what we identified on the arm model today. Right? We identified all of those different nerves that I just talked about, the median, the radial, and the ulnar, and all that stuff. Okay, so let me go back to the board here and show you a couple different things that I have. So once again, these are all the different parts of the brachial plexus. This is more here towards midline, so more medial, working our way this way. So I've already identified to you the serratus anterior, but the innervation of it is the long thoracic nerve. So the long thoracic nerve is what's coming off of the roots here. So then the suprascapular nerve, we're going to identify some of the muscles, but it helps to innervate the supraspinatus and the infraspinatus. So both of these are muscles from the rotator cuff. And so the suprascapular nerve is what's coming off of the trunks. So then if we continue to work our way this way, what you'll see is that the way that I have it drawn, it's what's representing, so the part that's here in red, this is the anterior division, meaning that these are the parts that are coming in the front. But then the part that's in blue, that's what's behind the anterior division. And so this is significant because by having the anterior and the posterior division, this the anterior division is primarily going to innervate the flexors, right? Because flexors are in the front. So then for the posterior division, it's primarily focused on the extensors. So we'll continue to work our way down until we get towards the branches. But coming off of the cords, the posterior cord, so number 3, you have the upper subscapular nerve. And then you also have the number 4, which is the medial pectoral nerve. So the medial pectoral nerve, that's what I said earlier, which is what innervates the pec major and pec minor. The upper subscapular nerve, that's what's going to innervate the subscapularis. So we're going to actually identify this particular nerve on the arm model. So then now we're reaching towards the branches, which is what I said earlier, which was marmu. So median, axillary, radial, and then median and ulnar. Okay, so let's look at the color division. So remember, for the anterior division, so 5, 6, and 7, so musculocutaneous, median, and ulnar, all of these are primarily innervating the flexors. But then for the posterior, coming off the posterior division, 8 and 9, so it's the radial, which is innervating the extensors, so we're going to identify some of them. And then for 8 is the axillary, which is innervating muscles of the shoulder. So we'll identify that here on the arm model next. Okay, so here is my arm model. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to start at the bottom, because this is the easiest part to start at. So on the pinky side, you have the ulnar nerve. Let me get a little bit closer. So you have the ulnar nerve, which is there, and then the part that's in the middle, that's the median nerve. If you work your way towards the thumb side, and I take this muscle off, this is where the radial nerve is. So this is the terminal branch of the radial nerve. It branches into the deep radial nerve, and then it's also found on this side as well. And then the superficial branch of the radial nerve comes back this way. So I'm going to leave this, put this in here. Okay, so now let's continue to work our way up and just like identify some of the nerves first. So this is the ulnar nerve, which is coming all the way up this way. And then if you look at the median nerve, which is here in the middle, that's what's coming up all the way up here. So then if we follow it all the way up this way, let's identify some of the ones up here. So this muscle here, this is one of the rotator cuff. It's the subscapularis. And so I talked about this earlier. This is the upper subscapular nerve. So that's number 68. So then number 72, that's what's going into the armpit. So what's the word that we use to describe armpit in anatomy? Axillary. Yeah, so that's what would make this the axillary nerve. So the axillary nerve goes in, it goes underneath the armpit, and then the axillary nerve, what it innervates is the deltoid muscle. So it innervates the deltoid muscle as well as the teres minor, which is here. So the axillary nerve, which is what I identified here, it goes down through the armpit and then it comes out and it goes this way. So innervating the teres minor as well as the deltoid. Okay. So the next one to identify is what's known as the musculocutaneous. So this nerve is going to innervate the coracobrachialis, so which is this muscle here, the coracobrachialis, the biceps brachii, as well as the brachialis muscle, which is here. And so if you notice the trend, what you'll see is that these nerves are sandwiched in between the superficial and deep muscles. So I had the deltoid up here, I took it off. You saw the axillary nerve going in. So those fibers will penetrate the deltoid, and then it'll also innervate one of the deeper muscles, which is the teres minor. And it's a similar case here with the musculocutaneous coming this way, because it's innervating a deep muscle, which is the brachialis, as well as the biceps brachii. Okay, so that's all the nerves up here. One other one I wanted to point out So the nerve is not shown here, but once again, this is the supraspinatus, this is the infraspinatus, and both of these are innervated by the suprascapular nerve. Okay, so now let's work our way back down again and identify some of the muscles. Okay, so the ulnar nerve, it innervates one of the muscles, which is known as the flexor carpi ulnaris, so that's what's found here. And then we've already identified the median nerve. And so the thing with the median nerve is that it's going to innervate the majority of the flexors for the wrists and the phalanges. So if we identify them, what is innervated by the median nerve, so you have the pronator teres, the flexor carpi radialis, the palmaris longus, which is here in the middle, as well as the flexor digitorum, right, because it's flexing the digits. Okay. So I'm going to take this off. And now we're going to look at the radius. So remember, once again, that's what's coming off of the anterior division, right? What's helping with the flexors. So coming off of the posterior division is what we know as the radial nerve. So this is the terminal branch of the radial nerve, and the superficial one goes here. So then with the radial nerve, it innervates, one of them is the extensor digitorum, right? So it's extending the digits. And then it also innervates one which is known as the brachial radialis. So that is the muscle, yeah, it would be right here. So this is what would be the brachial radialis right there, number 19. So then the last one that's innervated by the radial nerve is the triceps brachii. Okay. So that's going to do it for this lecture. Are there any questions? No? Oh, yeah, what's up?
When you say innervate, does that mean it controls that area?
Yes, great question. Yeah, so when I say it innervates, that means that it's giving it its nerve supply. So for instance, some of the nerves, we're learning like the names of the nerves that'll innervate like the muscle so that you can have a muscle contraction, right? So that's motor. But then once we start talking about sensation, we'll learn that the peripheral nerves, they have the motor function and a sensory component, which is, touch. So, great question. Okay, that's good.